get seated if it's okay, and I'll start in 30 seconds. Thanks. Okay. Okay, so we have lost someone in the cybersecurity system of the OECD. Thank you very much for being here. My name is Cyril Lachèvre. I'm a French editor of the French newspaper called L'Opinion. We are partners for the OECD Forum for years now, and I've been moderating roundtables for more than 10 years, and it's the first time I must have to thank OECD for giving me such a huge question of roundtable, cybersecurity, full stop, which is quite large, in 45 minutes. So maybe we can stand today without speaking about the subjects because it's so large, which means that we have decided to concentrate just on one specific subject, and I hope you won't be too frustrated. We have decided to speak about how can public and private sector cooperate now to enhance cybersecurity, and especially government and private actors. And this is the reason why we decided this, is that we have representatives from both these sectors. And I will start with David Martinon. You are the ambassador for digital affairs for France. And we are waiting for Kasper Klinge. I hope he will arrive, who is the tech ambassador of Denmark. Sitting next to you, David, we have Renata Avila, who is Senior Digital Rights Advisor. You are a lawyer for the World Wide Web Foundation. Shane Curran, you are Irish. You are founder of Murn, a cyber company that you have launched 6 months ago, which is specialized in helping people to protect their data. And I must say, sorry if I'm disgraceful, but it's quite impressive that you are just 18 years old and you're an academic and a researcher. And this is why we are very glad to have you today with us. Sitting left to you, Tara Wheeler, you are Principal Security Advisor and Cybersecurity Policy Fellow from the New America Foundation. You are coming from America, of course. David, I will start with you, if you mind. Because France is hosting at the end of this year a special forum speaking about these problems. Can you explain us what is the French strategy and how do you cope with this cybersecurity question from the government point of view?
So first of all, good afternoon, everyone. I must say right now that I have a duty to speak French in Paris in an international organization. So I'm gonna shift to French.
And so now that with that introduction done, what is France's strategy? Well, there's an internal strategy, the aim of which is to organize government so that it can fulfill the security of France's critical infrastructure. And there's also a diplomatic strategy that I'm in charge of, the aim of which, first via multilateral negotiations at the UN, is to find ways and means to stabilize cyberspace. It's an open secret that cyberspace has become a place of conflict where you can see daily attacks involving multiple actors in a context that is only going to deteriorate. Now you can see hybrid attacks, informational attacks, cyber attacks, and to all these issues we need to find diplomatic answers. Of course, each state is preparing, keeping in mind that no one's invulnerable, even the most advanced and powerful, but no one's invulnerable and no one's necessarily totally harmless. Even those states that are very little prepared, that have invested very little in cybersecurity, are, however, in a situation to carry out attacks. Because in the cyber world, you can see that skills are even more diffuse in this private sector than amongst governments. So even the poorest and least prepared states still have the capability to attack their opponents, and that's what we're seeing. And the context is a lot more complex than what we saw over the 70 years of the Cold War. It's not only a multipolar context, but it's not a clash between blocs. Anyone can take action. What's more, beyond governments, private actors are extremely efficient and effective, extremely diffuse, and for each one of them, the expected benefit of a cyber attack dwarfs the initial investment that you need to consent. And that's why we are in an unstable situation which is deteriorating and for which we need to find ways and means to stabilize it. What we are doing at the UN, at the Government Expert Group for Cybersecurity, we're trying to clarify the international legal rules that apply to cyberspace. We're trying to forge voluntary standards for governments, and we're trying to define procedures to promote de-escalation in some crises. And there's a French initiative that we promote in particular at the OECD. Beyond just that multilateral debate, we want to initiate a multi-stakeholder, multi-actor dialogue with companies, because we think that progress can still be made in the multilateral sphere, but what we're sure of is that it's now indispensable to engage some private players which have a systemic reach. What we're trying to do is to let them better define their roles and responsibilities. What we think is that if cyberspace is marked by instability, if there's conflict, it's because there's a digital battleground that exists. And this digital battleground is created by the imperfections in IT products that are brought to the market, be it software or even devices. We can see that almost all of them have vulnerabilities that can be easily exploited by manufacturers. I can see you looking at your watch, so just 3 ideas. What we're trying to achieve systemically is better awareness by software publishers and device manufacturers, awareness of their political, economic, and moral responsibilities when it comes to cybersecurity. It's commonplace to hear that these products are imperfect. That's true, but that should not be inevitable. We need to make progress on that front. And there's another 2 areas where we want to carry on making progress, as we've started doing it at the UN. First, we need to fight the proliferation in the trade of cyber weapons, and also we want to promote a ban on a number of practices like reverse hacking or hackback, so that private players can carry out private wars on behalf of private players. We think that there's an extreme destabilization risk in that, and that's why we've started direct negotiations, not just with governments, but also companies in the industry.
Later on, when everybody has got the chance to speak, I would like to turn to you, Casper Klinch. Welcome. Yeah, it's not a problem. We are still giving the floor to I would say, the government side, and then we'll have the private sector reaction. How can today countries and government work hand to hand, I don't know the exact term, with private companies to enhance cybersecurity? And just before you speak, must tell you what is the question. This is a trap for you, a trick. The question will be that you have to answer. Do you trust your government to handle cybersecurity? So I'll leave you 30 minutes before you answer, and then we'll see if you have convinced the people listening to us. Please.
Well, thanks very much, and apologies for being late. I was with a French minister, Majoubé, and it dragged on a little bit, so I think today I have a good excuse, right?
He speaks a lot. Yeah. He's French.
I have no comments whatsoever on that. I think, I mean, just to begin with, I'm the Danish tech ambassador, and this is a new initiative taken by the Danish government to try and really treat technology as a foreign policy priority. It's not unlike what David is doing on the French side, and cybersecurity is an important part of what we're doing. But we're among friends here, so I think I can be honest in saying that this is also an initiative in response to us down prioritizing cyber for many, many years. I think we've done that on the government side, we've done it inside the foreign ministry, and the wake-up call happened basically 12 months ago with the NotPetya attack that put one of the big Danish companies out of business for a very long time at an extreme cost, almost an existential attack basically. So we're gunning up, and we just 2 weeks ago launched a new national cybersecurity strategy that encompasses both defensive measures back home and quite a sizable chunk of money as well to beef up our domestic defense system. But it also includes a focus on the multinational, multilateral collaboration. And I think that's an area we haven't gotten right yet. And I think we're all struggling a little bit on finding how can we cooperate multilaterally on cybersecurity issues. We don't have the answer to that, but having conversations with people like David and other cyber ambassadors to try and find a response between like-minded countries is important. But going back to your question, what is at the core of the Danish government's diplomacy initiative is in fact to increase the dialogue with the private sector. And it's not only the Googles, the Facebooks, the Amazons of this world. We have a global mandate, so we also take a global view on the industry, including in China, in Asia, in Europe. But the fundamental task, I think, is to make sure that the companies will assume a responsibility which is proportional to the influence they're exercising over our societies. Some of them are doing better than others. I think with recent attacks, there is a heightened understanding that they need to do more, also for commercial reasons. And then there are a couple of them, and I won't name any names today, that are perhaps trailing a little bit behind on this issue, have more difficulties understanding that this is not something which is only the responsibility of governments. It's something where we need to have a public-private partnership to try and find common solutions, also to ensure that their platforms are not used for the malign attacks that we've seen in the past. I sort of trust my government in this issue, but we haven't done enough, and I think we will do whatever we can, but we need the private sector to step up to the plate and help us solve some of these problems. Final comment, I think we're used to looking at the balance of power or threats in terms of either conventional weapons or nuclear weapons. What we are arguing is that we need to include artificial intelligence, machine learning into that equation, and certainly also cyber attacks. And I think there's a common misunderstanding that I'm very often confronted with, and that is that artificial intelligence will be part of the solution. It will help us solve the cyber attacks. I think we have to bring in a degree of realism that artificial intelligence is certainly also going to increase the capabilities of the state and non-state actors that are not necessarily wanting to do good in life. So that's the approach of the Danish government. And again, I'm so sorry to be late.
Oh, you're welcome. We are glad to have you with us. Please don't hesitate to ask questions using the BCAST system. I think you are all familiar with it. I don't know if you have everything. OECD is the room number 3. I'm going to turn to you, Tara Wheeler, New America Foundation. Being a little bit provocative, you are very familiar with the hacking companies or the hackers, and you know very well how they work and how we can use these people and or what is being developed in private company to fight and to strengthen cybersecurity. What is your opinion on these relationships with government?
Thank you very much for the welcome here today. My name is Tara Wheeler. I'm an information security researcher, which is a very polite way to describe what I often do every day. I'm afraid of something. I'm seeking in my mind for wisdom right now to say the right thing, and I want to explain how afraid I am of an attack that as yet has no name. We often ask ourselves in the United States, what will be the Pearl Harbor of cybersecurity? What will be the attack that is so devastating that it has a new name in the future? It hasn't happened yet. There have been devastating attacks, but there is no such thing yet as the cybersecurity Pearl Harbor. For when there is one, we won't need to call it by a different name. It'll have its own name, like Pearl Harbor, like 9/11, like the Paris bombings. I'm afraid of that attack, and I'm afraid that the public sector does not often listen to the best resource it has for determining in advance where risks lie. May 24th, just 5 days ago, we heard the 20th anniversary of the first cybersecurity hearing in the United States Congress. Members of the Loft Group, I'm thinking right now of Kingpin, Mudge, Weld Pond, and Space Rogue, came back and testified 20 years after they first testified in Congress in 1998 that many of the same vulnerabilities, old infrastructure, poorly written code, incredible devastating security holes are still present in American and global internet infrastructure. I'm frightened because I see a lack of partnership between public and private resources in the United States and beyond. I see the devastating chilling effects of the 1986 legislation, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, which was both poorly drafted and often extremely arbitrarily enforced. I hope for the wisdom to reach a hand out and provide the kind of wisdom and wit and humor often that the information security community tries to gather, as well as information about the potential for devastating attacks. And I do absolutely call on the public sector to listen carefully to the words that are coming from the information security about the vulnerabilities that they have discovered and are trying to tell people about. Please listen to the information security community instead of prosecuting them, instead of frightening them with threats of lawsuits and action. It's a joy and an honor and a privilege to be here, and I'm thinking of people right now who are on the fringes of the information security community, who hope that their wisdom and that their warnings are going heard someplace. I hope and I pray that that is the case, and it's a pleasure to be here. I don't know how much I can control the information security community, but I'll certainly bring back the good word from here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tara, for this very interesting and heart-filling comment, and we'll turn back to you later. Renata Avila, I want just that everybody has chance to speak at the beginning. So you are a lawyer, as I told, a senior digital right advisor. If we think binary way, we have developed countries that are thinking with ambassadors about these cybersecurity questions, but we're also seeing developing countries with a lot of people getting used to internet, and danger could come from here also.
Exactly. Actually, when you were describing the attack on the Pearl Harbor on this terrible day, I was thinking about the terrible, when that day is translated into a poor woman in a developing country that finds out that that his mobile payment system has been hacked, and that she has no mechanism of redress, and she has no one to call, and she has no means to survive that day because it's her monthly wage. I think that that's also a different way to see cybersecurity. It is a global problem. It's something that brings us together, and we are not bringing the right pieces into place because I think that, as you were describing, the two ambassadors were describing, often is a public-private partnership, but the consumer side, the citizen side, is neglected, and usually civil society find closed doors. Why closed doors? Because it's security concern, and I don't know why we perpetuate this exclusion of community from security. Where I come from Central America, one of the most, and I lived in one of the most violent cities in the world. We have learned the hard way, and we have learned that if you exclude community from the security problems, even if the security problems are so technical or so complex, you end up with a flawed security strategy. So just a random question. Who is connected here to the public Wi-Fi of the OECD? Raise the hand. Who read the terms of service of it? So that's my point. My point is that regardless if you are a super technical person that understands the issues, or you are just a person attending a conference, we are walking asleep into this interconnectedness. And by 2020, it's calculated that we will be connected to at least 6 devices per person. And this environment is only spreading, and we are not trees. We move around different spaces with different levels of awareness, and we really need to have a healthy policy, collaborative policy, where everyone, a little bit like we did with food safety, for example, or water safety, or a very basic thing, problems that we have solved. If citizens, from our private spaces, from our communities, we do not push governments and private sector to get it right, we will fail. And we will fail, we will have just, okay, a nice cybersecurity policy on a website, and guys with military and police uniforms meeting in closed spaces, and the lady who lost all her monthly wage completely neglected. So my call will be, we need to follow top-down, bottom-up, combine, open up spaces, be open about the problems, and be more creative about the solutions. And being creative about the solutions means interconnectedness. Most of the new people that will connect in the next years, this year we are reaching a key point. 50% of the world will be connected. For the first time, half of humanity is connected. And in the next years, I think that many of the solutions and many of the keys to solve the problems that we are facing now, I hope, will come from these new people. And so, closing with a note of hope, I think that we have a responsibility to not delay these 20 years. I mean, we can, if we have neglected the problem 20 years, maybe we need to take from now to 2020 to fix it.
Thank you very much, Renata. Please don't hesitate. I don't have many questions. I don't have any questions. Of course, I will give you the floor in real life at the end if you are shy enough to ask a question. But please don't hesitate, because we have to make it the more interactive so that everybody learns from the others. Shane Corona, we have finished our first round table. Turning to you, you have a specific position. You are protecting or helping people protect their data, which is the heart of what is happening and what we can read, speaking about the Facebook case, for example. How do you see the subject developing? Are you afraid about the protection of data, or is it something that is getting better and better?
Yeah, I mean, I'm somewhat young and significantly more naive than a lot of people here, which is both an asset, but it's also sometimes a disadvantage. I think in this particular example, it's pretty useful in that I've sort of an extreme tendency for oversimplification of these problems. I used to think, well, I still do think that cybersecurity is mostly a human issue. And as a result, I used to think that education was the best way to sort of progress the problem and come and sort of develop a solution. Over the past while, I've kind of realized that that's not the case. I think data security in particular is something that people are just firstly not interested in learning. There's a small sort of cohort of people who have, a keen interest in it and are sort of developing their own knowledge of it. But if you look at a company like Facebook, for example, everybody cares about data privacy, but in the Facebook example, nobody actually does anything to solve it. During the sort of Cambridge Analytica scandal a few weeks ago, or a couple of months ago, there was sort of a movement for everybody to delete their Facebook account. And what actually happened was Facebook growth, or Facebook usage grew about 25% for that sort of space of 2 weeks, which is really sort of indicative of the sort of, lack of care that people have. Some people will make a statement out of it and say, this is the time to move away from Facebook and sort of liberate their data. But I kind of came to the conclusion that the best way around that is through using real technologies and real solutions to solve those problems. So that's what I'm kind of doing now with my company Muon. We launched about 6 months ago, and we're developing a platform that allows third-party services to process personal data without ever seeing or handling it. And we're using some pretty interesting hardware and software to make that happen. and it evolved from a research project that I was doing about 2 years ago on cryptography and on cybersecurity in general. I think, sort of to go back to the question, the difficult thing for governments is to bring things out of academia and bring them into a real world use case. And with cybersecurity in particular, there's a lot of research happening, but the solutions that government are trying to do are mostly regulatory. And as a result, there's so many different loopholes and patches that have to be done, because what you're doing really is you're just putting little plasters on a sinking boat, and over time that's just not a feasible solution. So I think we really need to rethink the way that that's being solved, and particularly sort of encourage academic researchers as well as sort of startup founders and entrepreneurs that their solution is something that government are interested in. Sometimes that can be done through venture capital or a direct investment, but other times it could be something as simple as promising a small young company that a particular government or a large company are happy to use their solution if they develop it. And that's sort of the way forward that I see, if that's possible. I'm not sure if it is, but I hope so.
Thank you for this comment. So I want to turn back to the two ambassadors to have their reaction to what have been said. If we try to sum up what we have been told, there are three main themes. Do you fear an attack, a global attack? What kind of attack do you fear? How can we enhance education, because it seems to be very important, more important sometimes than technology. We think about technology at the first, but education of people can be very important. And then how to use how to work with customers, with the third party, I would say, because of course it's not only private companies and states, it's also me as a data owner, my own data. So how do you cope with these three questions?
I can take the first. So about a global attack, this is really interesting, because this is something we fear, even though we have already faced that kind of attack. The DynDNS attack at the fall of 2016 was already something extremely brutal and global that put down the internet on the whole east coast of the US. And by the way, the perpetrators were just 2 American teenagers, which shows how efficient a very small team can be. Maybe you were part of it? No?
He's Irish.
We'll check your ID. Actually, the WannaCry attack was absolutely a global attack. And the NotPetya attack, even though it was focused only on mainly one country, had a global reach too, because you said Casper, I guess, suggested that Maersk was attacked, and obviously Maersk is a global company, and some French companies were also impacted, and they have a global reach. The other big threat that we're looking at is the fact that there might be at some point, or there may be at some point, a cyber terrorist attack. As I was saying before, we know that basically competencies are on the market for hire. So if you are a mafia or a terrorist organization that can have some means, then you have the ability to hire the right people to launch something big. And it is technically feasible now to take control of whatever means of transportation we can have on Earth or not, and you can, you can obviously endanger a lot of people. That was question 1. I leave Casper to the others.
To customers, education, work with academics, of course.
Yeah, you took the easy ones there, David. So yeah. Yeah, that will haunt me, I guess. I think just responding to some of the questions, do we fear a big attack? Absolutely. I represent a country that is extremely digitalized. Just a week ago, we had the new DESI index coming out in Europe, and Denmark, for the 5th year in a row, is at the top of it. That's something we're proud of, but of course it also brings with it a lot of vulnerabilities. And I think, I'm not a technical expert, but when we see the rollout of IoT, when we see new technologies coming in, that vulnerability is going to increase quite dramatically. And in our case, it means that our wind turbines are connected. It means that our healthcare system is connected. So this is not a theoretical or virtual problem. This is a real issue, and we need to do something about it. I think there are 2 points perhaps that I would make. If we look at our national cybersecurity strategy, there are 2 aspects that I think are important. First, we are actually setting up a 24/7 cybersecurity center that has accessibility for private people, but also for companies. And what we're trying to do is that companies can do this on an anonymous basis, because a lot of the companies are perhaps a little bit reluctant to acknowledge that they've been under attack or even have been penetrated because of the commercial interest in it. What we're trying to do is to enable those companies to do it without any risks. And into that cybersecurity strategy is also, there is a very important educational element in it, where experts, subject experts will be able to go and basically do on-the-job training for those companies that might be interested in it, that are particularly prone to these type of attacks. Will it mitigate the risk completely? Of course not, absolutely not. And that's why I think the international dimension is a critical part of it. And again, just to repeat, I think we need to work together in NATO and the European Union, even at the United Nations level, but we also need to bring in the private sector. And the private sector, I have to stress, they have enormous responsibility here. They need to step up to the plate, and we need to see them actually help us find the solutions rather than just be part of the platforms. Very last point, and then I'll shut up. But just a small anecdote, and I won't mention what company, but one of the meetings I had on cybersecurity in Silicon Valley with a fairly large company, we were talking a little bit about the defensive mechanisms that we have at a national level. And this is not a person who was trying to be arrogant or unpleasant, but he said to me, laughing, but you have to understand, our systems are so much superior to what you can do at the national level. And I think that shows, of course, this is an existential problem for the private sector, but there are also solutions out there that can be utilized by governments to also avoid what I think is a very, very important point, the digital inequality, which is an important part of that. It might be damaging for the Danish economy or a specific company, but for people out there, if there is a breach of cybersecurity, it's a life or death issue almost. So I think that's an important part of what we're trying to focus on as well.
Thank you very much. I think I've been hacked. I'm not sure that it works, because I'm seeing that a lot of you are asking questions, but I don't receive it. So if they can have the technical person just to manage this. There is a very important point that we haven't spoke about. It's money. I mean, and this is for everybody. Who should pay for cybersecurity, or should I say for cyber protection? Is it the state responsibility as a public services, I would say, to protect his citizens? Is it companies that are using my data? Is it me as a personal? Should I take an insurance? Where do we stand regarding this, and how is it? Why is it important? Tara, maybe.
I come out of academic political economy, and I would, after years of looking at this problem, define cybersecurity as what we would call a public good. There's a tragedy of the commons issue here, where people are pulling resources out of the digital economy and not replacing them in the form of making the world a more secure place. As a result, it's not just private companies, it's not just the public sector, and it is not just private citizens who have a responsibility for paying for cybersecurity. Much like removing pollution, it's the responsibility of a complex set of incentives. Each individual person has the responsibility to not pollute or litter more than they have the absolute mandate to do. It's the responsibility of private companies to not pollute, of the government to set proper incentives. And once we find a balance in those incentives, we see that pollution can be effectively reduced. In the same sort of way, cybersecurity and the provision of it is a public good that involves a partnership among industry, among governments, and among private citizens, all of whom bear responsibility for this ecosystem we are all affected by.
Renata, and then think, because David also wanted to react.
Well, sorry. Similarly, I think that, as with the environmental issues, there's different size of responsibility allocated in different parties. The main providers of hardware and software come from G20 countries. And I think that G20 economies have a huge responsibility in fixing this. But I will take more and taking another analogy of a preemptive health approach. So we need to get this. I think that if the technologies are designed in more resilient ways and standards are passed that have horizontal effects, not only, for example, not only if you can afford the fanciest top of the top, security and secure devices shouldn't be a plus in the product, should be the standard. We had that fight with the security belts in cars, we had that fight with other technologies, and I think that that's the fight to have. We need the technology to be designed with the highest standards for everyone. And that's a cost that should be borne by part by the state, part by the companies, and by those benefiting the most by selling those products, I think. And it will have like the result will be better security for everyone.
David, yeah.
I just want to say on who should take responsibility for cybersecurity. Obviously, everyone should get prepared, because it would be incredibly dishonest to say that governments can cover for everyone. It's just impossible, and even governments have a hard time protecting their own critical infrastructures. Just the NSA had a hard time to protecting some of some crucial crucial infrastructures in the US. What is sure is that there is a growing insurance market on cyber in the US, notably. We don't see that coming here in Europe, because obviously the truth is that it's the pricing for insurance contracts based on cyber risks is impossible. It's impossible. So it's just a financial valuation. And three, it leads us to the same point that I was mentioning at the beginning, which is how do we make sure that everyone, including private actors, behave the right way when they protect themselves in a situation of competition between two companies. If one of them manages to steal the data of the other one, then not only it's unlawful, but it gives a clear advantage to the attacker. So what should the defender do? Well, it's really difficult, and there is always a temptation to go and look for assistance from another cyber company who will be able not only to protect but also to hack back. And this is exactly what we want to stop, what we want to ban, because we believe it's the recipe for global destabilization.
Shane, you are helping people protect their data. Do they pay for this, or what do you think about this?
Yeah, from my side, I'd just like to address it briefly by saying that on the cybersecurity side in general, I agree with Tara in saying that there should be some sort of incentive system where it's just built into society that cybersecurity is something that needs to be addressed. On the personal data side of things, I'm an ardent supporter of kind of personal data monetization, in that if you put money into a bank account, you're earning a rate of interest, because there's a risk there. There's a risk that the bank could go bust. Whatever, small risk, maybe a bit higher. At the same time, I think there should be something similar in the data privacy realm. So I would say that I agree in saying that individuals should definitely not pay for it. With Muon, in our particular use case, we have the companies that are processing the data pay for the service, and individuals get monetized for their data itself. So there's no governmental involvement, but if they wanted to be involved, it would probably be more on a corporate level. But in terms of the usage of the actual service, I think it needs to be that the individuals themselves need to be sort of incentivized in a monetary sense, and then companies that are processing the data should pay for it.
We have a lot of questions that are coming here, not here, so sorry about that, but a lot of them turn around trust. How can we trust NSA, and how can we trust the government to help us? And we have seen while Mark Zuckerberg was during his hearing in the United States, that trust wasn't here from his side. We as a journalist were saying he has things to hide, and people from the government side didn't understood what was happening. So how can we cope with this trust problem? I don't trust my government or and my neighbor, my company. How is there a miracle, specific way to cope with this, Tara?
The answer is that if your incentives are misaligned with who you should trust, you probably have a problem. If your government has the capacity to watch everything you're doing and you are merely trusting that they are not watching everything you are doing, then I would ask, what is that trust based upon? For companies, incentives need to be based around serving their customers. And sometimes customers and users aren't the same thing. It's a dangerous thing to watch out for. So the answer is just don't trust where you don't have to, because you don't know who you're delegating that trust to as a third party. For so many people in the world, cybersecurity is an abstract concept. It's not real. From people who experience cybersecurity at the street level that Renata's been speaking about, who are affected by vicious, horrifying hacks that take what we would think of, many of the people in this room, as a small amount of money, yet as the livelihood for a single person, all the way to military establishments that have a hard time even conceiving of the work that I do in the fifth battleground as real. The digital battleground that David is speaking about is not only real, but it's very difficult to, just as in cyber insurance, assign proper weights to it in terms of risk. And if you can't tell what your risk is, if you can't tell what the problem is, and the people around you aren't even sure that what you're talking about is real, it's going to be very difficult to trust them with your life, your security, and your future.
Casper, you want to react to this question?
Yeah. Listen, I just got a beating from a French minister who said you don't like regulation in Northern Europe and in Denmark. And I think just to set the standards straight, I think part of the solution, you mentioned it before, is actually to have standards for devices. And I think as we see an explosion of new devices coming in, from refrigerators to autonomous vehicles, those standards are going to be critical. So, David, can you report back? We're not against regulation per se. Good. The other point on trust, I recently relocated to the US, haven't lived there before. I think there is a very big difference between Europe and the US on the trust issue. In Europe, we tend to trust governments. I think this is not black and white, but in general, certainly in Silicon Valley, there's a high degree of trust in companies. That is sort of a cultural approach, or a difference in the cultural approach to where trust lies and who we can believe in. I think the interesting thing is that over the last couple of months, even in the 8 months I've been on the ground in the US, I think we're seeing a convergence of views across the Atlantic on these issues. Also because some of the very unfortunate cases we've seen with Facebook and Cambridge Analytica. I think that's a good thing, because if you allow me to be a little bit foreign policy focus for a second, I think the transatlantic dimension is going to be critically important. We have similar views and values. We need to stick together, even at a time of political turmoil where we might disagree on some of the fundamental aspects. In Silicon Valley, they look at Europe as being over-regulating. I think on our side of the Atlantic, we look at the companies perhaps being a little bit too unregulated. But I think there is a momentum in this where we can actually find a common approach across the Atlantic, and I think that's important also from a cybersecurity point of view.
We have 2 minutes left. Do you have any question in real life? Or there's a very interesting question I wanted to ask, but please don't hesitate. No? Okay. There is a question, and we will end with this one. I'm sorry. Any views on the EU's attempt to approach cybersecurity? And we also have questions on GDPR. Do you think that Europe is in advance on this subject? Just a quick answer.
So we are very much, as the French government, we are very much in favor of trying to build something like a European cyber autonomy, meaning we very much favor the creation of a real strong industry, a real market, of, yes, a certification scheme, so that we make sure that every product that is put on the European market are safe and secure. And we are also on the position that we need to build common competencies and facilities in order to help those who need to be better prepared, if I want to make it very short.
Any comments? Just times is up, but we have 1 minute, sir.
Cybersecurity regulation should be a small amount with teeth.
So I really like the idea of disarmament and this approach of reducing the proliferation of cyber weapons.
No comment on Europe being leadership in cybersecurity. No, you don't feel like this.
I think from a regulatory perspective, yes. GDPR, though, is, for the vast majority of companies, unless you're someone like Google or Facebook, GDPR is a concern, but you don't know how to go about it. It's dozens of hours with lawyers, and most companies just can't afford that. From a technical perspective, I think certainly the west coast of the USA are far ahead in terms of their recognition of it within large organizations and small organizations, particularly in the tech world. So I think from a regulatory perspective, Europe is ahead. From a technical perspective, the US is ahead.
Casper, the last word.
Sorry, I was late.
No. Thank you very much. Please.
I think they took the microphone away from me. Okay. I think on the European aspect, normally I get a lot of beating from the Silicon Valley companies about GDPR and what Europe is doing, but it's the only game in town right now. So in that sense, I think Europe is setting the global standards in the ecosystem of technology. Is it perfect? Perhaps not, but I think we need to move in that direction, and that's where I think there is recognition, even in Washington, and even among the venture capitalists in Silicon Valley. And when they speak about regulation, we know something has happened.
Thank you very much. It was very frustrating, 45 minutes, but very interesting. Thank you for the audience, and thank you for your time.